And now we'll continue with part 2 of a Compendium of Britannia-like games. Italia is by the same designer as Hispania. It's also of similar complexity. It covers Italy, a bit of North Africa, and some of the borderland around northern Italy. The game uses campaigns involving big groups of units making many attacks as they move through areas so that a campaign can conquer a large area at once. This is sort of a super major invasion, I suppose you could say. Obviously, given the Italian history, there are two game segments separated by the period of Roman domination and the empire. Invasions 1 is all of Europe and North Africa post-Rome. This one covers earlier history, and Invasions 2 will cover later history. There are vastly more areas than Britannia. I counted once and it seems like there were somewhere around 150. Vastly more pieces and piece types. So it's in the vein of Hispania and Italia, but perhaps even bigger. It's also one of the few Britannia-like games that uses event cards. Now, when you know that the original designer of Europa Universalis, both the tabletop and video versions, is the designer of this game, you might understand the level of complexity. Then we have Duel Britannia. This is packaged with the reissue of Britannia. It's for 2 players, up to 90 minutes, 7 turns, many fewer land areas on a new board. So it's considerably simpler than Britannia, especially in the scoring. The scoring is immensely simpler. It is a 2-player game, although perhaps you might be able to make a 3-player game out of it, but that is not in the box because I only had a year to design it, and the 2 players was a pain in the butt to try to get right, and so I didn't get to a 3-player game. This and the reissue of Britannia are the only Britannia-like games with plastic figure armies. They're 18 millimeters tall, which is much larger, for example, than the pieces in Risk, when the Risk had little armies. And I've seen photos of the figures as painted by gamers, painted individually. Now, unpublished games by other designers. There was one called Mandate of Heaven, where I ran across a playtest online years ago, and I haven't heard of it since. It was huge. There's one called Corsica, which is a small island in the Mediterranean, relatively small. It's where Napoleon Bonaparte was born. I have a print and play copy, and they may be an electronic form. It is as big as Britannia, despite the small island. A game called Mediterranean, which was the area around the Mediterranean. A game called Conquest of Europe by Roger Haywood, who was the uncredited developer of the original Britannia for H.P. Gibson's. And there definitely is an entry for that in Board Game Geek. There may be more. The unpublished ones are hard to ferret out. Then we have B3, as I call it, which is the 3rd edition of Britannia, which actually is 3 separate games: Epic Britannia, Rule Britannia, and Conquer Britannia. Epic is what I call a better teaching tool. It has more constraints. It is otherwise a full Britannia with an additional freeform mode that works well with 2, 3, 4, or 5 players and is much quicker and simpler. The scoring uses the simple method that I've used in some of the small games. There are land raids or forays. There are no starving armies. The Romans have to work at it, which they don't really in 2nd edition Britannia. It's had lots of solo testing, but not much by others. Then Rule Britannia is 9 turns, 4 players, diceless. It uses combat cards, and includes Ireland. It's been tested a little by others a long time ago. The diceless method has been tested a lot in other games. Conquer Britannia is up to 220-minute game for 4 players. The shortest 4 people have played it is 84 minutes. After the Roman withdrawal, It's been playtested by others a lot. I intend to make a 3-player version for before the Romans appear. It has 6 turns, it has 18 land areas, it has 11 nations. Much of Duel Britannia, the methods used in it, derive from Conquer Britannia. And I have designed quite a few other games to various stages. Megabrit had 55 land areas, 24 nations, 24 turns, and included Ireland. I played this maybe 3 times solo a long time ago. Dark Ages, Europe about 400 CE to 1250, 5 players, and pretty big. Played once by others, some by me. A different big Europe game that didn't have a name was played once by several people in 1980, 12 hours. And I had a note on it that if Britannia then got published, maybe this could be published, but no, it's long abandoned. Then we have Arthuria, or Adventus Saxonum, that excludes Scotland and Ireland, has 20 nations. It starts when the Romans are gone and ends before the Vikings. Caledonia is the early history of Scotland. It's simpler and shorter than Britannia. Normannia, which is Britain, France, and the Vikings. Barbaria, which is all of Europe, 400 to 1250, in 6 turns. It is simpler and much shorter than Britannia, and unlike most of these, it has been submitted to publishers. Francia, the early history of France and Germany, which is diceless, uses that card combat system. It has 3 scenarios, one for 3 players, the others for 4, and that's been submitted to publishers too. Hellenia, played 3 times solo. It is not complex, but it's a large map because it's all the Mediterranean and the Near East. And so you have a very long but fairly narrow map. Rome, Carthage, and the Diadochi, 5 players, I think. Hibernia is more like a block game than like Britannia, but it has many Britannia-like characteristics. It's the history of Ireland, the early history of Ireland, for 3 players, not 4. And the most recent one, Minimalist Britannia, as I call it, has only 13 land areas, 3 players, diceless, and it plays solo in an hour. 1 hour. I even started on a Third Age J.R.R. Tolkien game once and played once. This list excludes games I have mapped out or set up reinforcement schedules for but haven't played. India, Iberia, Central Asia, China, Babylonia, the Balkans, Hungary, the Americas, Colombia, Byzantium, Sicily, even Wales. Who knows where else that I've missed over the years. Most of these a long time ago. It is, of course, a drawback of Britannia-like games that they tend to be long, and that's not what people want these days. You may have heard of my game Germania, and you might have thought from the similar title that it's Britannia-like. It is not, although it is of similar scale. Then we have History of the World, which is a sweep of history game, but not Britannia-like, though I have to say it might benefit from being more like Britannia. It certainly loses sight of history. So this turned out to be a lot more than I expected, and now I should get some more of mine published, shouldn't I?